G'day and welcome to another episode of Built by Dan. In today's episode, I'm going to be installing the front chassis extension panels and the radiator and thermo fans in my GT40 kit car. So I'm not sure what happened, but I seem to have lost some footage somewhere along the lines. So unfortunately I don't have any clips showing the installation of the thermo fans onto the shrouds. However, it was as simple as just laying the thermo fans on top, marking the location of those holes, drilling the 8 holes and bolting it on. Unfortunately, the bolts that were supplied with the kit are too short. Once you actually insert them through the thermo fan mount and through the hole in the shroud, there wasn't enough thread left to install the nut, or the washer. Basically, even if I remove the washer, the thread wouldn't actually pass through to the nylon washer that's inside the nut. So I need to get that resolved, but for now it's all held in place so we can continue with the install, and I've just added it to my list of things to be resolved as part of the final assembly. So I'm going to start this front chassis extension section by doing the sides first. So I'll bolt on the sides and then I'll look to bolt on the bottom plate. I've been umming and ahhing for a little while as to which way to do it, whether to try and bolt up the bottom piece first and just put a block of timber underneath the front to support it, or whether I start with the sides. But I do believe that starting with the sides is probably going to make life a little bit easier. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get a couple of bolts in for now, and then I can finish it all off once it's all sort of loosely installed. Okay, it's as simple as that, bolting the side piece onto the main chassis. It is just 4 bolts. I've tightened 2 of them up. I'll leave the other 2 loose for now, just until I can make sure that everything sort of sits as it should. Now I'll jump to the other side. Okay, so that's the 2 sides loosely installed. I will now make a start on the base. Okay, so that's just one done up finger tight. This bottom panel does actually sit underneath, but I'm just using the sides, the little return on the sides, to support it for now. And I can always just either flex them out a little bit or undo the bolts. So I've got all 3 bolts on one side, 1 bolt on the other side. I'm just going to see if I can now get the side mounted to the base. There are some elongated holes here, so there's obviously a bit of adjustment there. What I might actually do is not tighten these bottom ones up until I mount the radiator in between, because I think that will dictate what the spacing should be between those 2 sides, and then I can tighten up the base ones accordingly. Now I approach with these bolts similar to a couple of other areas, appreciating that bolts should go from top to bottom. But given that we're dealing with the front of the vehicle here, trying to maximize my ground clearance and not have the additional nut and thread from the bolt sticking out underneath, which could cause some ground clearance issues later on. This way I just have the bolt head underneath, or the screw head underneath, and that's it. And I'll repeat the same for the other side. Alright, that's everything just done up finger tight. I do still have a couple of bolts to put in from the bottom here. Almost forgot about the underneath there. And then I think what I'll do is I'll tighten up the bottom panel where I'm currently putting these screws in now. And then we'll look to assemble and install the radiator before I tighten off the sides. I feel like a bit of a contortionist at the moment, but it's really awkward to get into where this bolt is right in the corner. Okay, that's all the bolts in finger tight. I'll get to tightening them up and then we'll come back and look at installing the radiator and thermo fans. Unfortunately, the audio hasn't come through for this clip, so I'll just explain what I was running through here. I was just covering off the assembly of the radiator and thermofan unit. So the fans were bolted to the shroud first, and then the shroud is screwed to the outside frame of the radiator with the supplied spaces in between. This holds the nuts from the bolts that pass through the fan frame and the shroud from hitting the fins of the radiator. For final assembly, there is also an adhesive foam strip that will be installed in the gap created by the spaces to try and ensure as much airflow as possible through the radiator. Okay, now before I get too carried away with the installation of the radiator, I just thought I'd quickly show you what I have done is just installed this little spacer that goes inside the grommet just so it doesn't compress too much. And I've just put a bolt in the top corner on each side, and the reason for that is because I've just been playing around with how the actual supplied bolt assembly is supposed to work. Basically, this is what's supplied. There's the bolt, the nut, there's a zinc washer, and then there's 2 stainless washers. So the only thing that I could work out is that zinc washer on the outside for the bolt head, and then the stainless washer either side of the rubber grommet to hold that little spacer inside that rubber grommet without it pulling through the actual bolt hole in the chassis panel. So I don't know if that's correct or not, but it's the only thing that I could come up with that seemed logical based on what was supplied. So I'm going to run with that for now. Again, this is all just a test fit. It will likely get pulled out before the car's finished, and then we'll go back together as part of the final assembly. So now I'll have a crack at installing the rest of these bolts and washers. I might even just try and get the bolts in to start with, and then I can focus on putting the nuts on later. All right, that's one side, just with the bolts thread through the holes and the spaces in the grommets. I might just go and fix off, just finger tight the nuts on each of them just so that they don't pop out while I'm playing around with the other side. I think leaving these loose will just give me a little bit more flexibility to move that around, just so I can get all the washers in and get it all positioned correctly. So now I'll jump to the other side. I'll try and reposition the camera so you can see a bit better what I'm actually doing, and we'll get this all fitted off. Okay, so I now have all the bolts done up finger tight. You can see there I've still got the cardboard sitting in behind those thermo fans. That's because I do still need to take them off and address these bolts, which weren't long enough to even pass through the nylon part of the nylock nut. Bit of a tongue twister there. But I can still at least get it all bolted and make sure that it all fits. Now, I do actually need to install the air conditioning evaporator in front of that radiator, but there is no guidance in the build manual as to how that is supposed to be done. I haven't been able to get in contact with any other builders that have completed that step, and the manufacturer has not been able to supply any additional information to date. So for now, I'm just going to stick with the radiator install, as much as I would have liked to do the air conditioning at the same time and just be done with this section. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do that. So it'll have to come out at some stage. When I do that, I'll remove the cardboard that's on there just to protect the fins of the radiator. I'll hopefully have a solution to address the bolts that are holding those thermo fans on that are too short, and have some further guidance as to how the air conditioning evaporator is to be installed in front of that radiator. I'm going to now tighten off those bolts. As I mentioned, everything is still pretty loose. I'm going to tighten the bolts to the radiator first, and then I'll go and tighten off these bolts that I've left loose on the side panels, and also on the bottom here where the side panels attach to the base panel. Okay, that's everything tightened off now. Okay, so here's a quick look at everything fitted off. Really not much difference to the way you saw it previously. It's just a bit more solid. So now, show you what I mean underneath in terms of keeping everything, or trying to maximize clearance by having the bolt heads underneath. I know that the manufacturer installed the hinge with the nut and bolt sticking through. However, they don't seem to protrude as far as what these bolts would for the chassis panels. So now, before I started this. I did actually fit the silicone hoses to the hard coolant tubes that run through the center tunnel. And here I have the flexible tubes that will be fit off between the silicone hose there on that center tube and each side of the radiator. So this I'm going to have a look at doing now. I'm probably going to have to cut them down a little bit, but all in all, we'll just try and fit them into the silicone adapters or the silicone joiners and get a stainless cable tie on there to hold it in place. What I'm looking to do now is to form up these flexible hoses to try and make them work to connect from our rigid tube that runs through the center tunnel to the radiator. So it looks like there's probably going to be a bit of adjustment required just to cut it down or just change the shape of it slightly even, just to use the full length. I don't see why there's a need to use the full length, but I'll probably just try and form this up as best I can and see how I go. I have sort of started from the centerpiece, bent it around just in a snake shape and then bent it up to come up to the connection on the radiator. It is quite difficult to try and get that to sit right to know what length it needs to be. I might even just do it in a number of cuts just so I don't take off too much in the first instance. But I might just keep playing around and see if I can actually use up more of the length rather than having to resort to cutting. That does get pretty close to using it up. I don't think I'd really want to try and make that consume any more than it already has of the hose. I think I might just go and cut that off right there. Alright, so that's cut down now. So once that's in, I can sort of manipulate that a little bit still, but all in all, that's come up quite well. I think I might just try and connect this central end. Oops, forgot that fell off. I'm going to make sure that I push that in as far as I possibly can. There are a couple of clips that will go on to hold the hose in place so it doesn't vibrate and move around too much. But in terms of the fitment so far, I'm pretty happy with how it's sitting. Just get that silicone adapter on halfway and tighten that off before I try and insert the hose. Be able to get that held down once I get my clamps in place. So I'm not too concerned about that. That's one side done. Now I'll just move to the other side. Just gonna make a start on the other side now. I haven't actually attempted to preform this tube yet, so we'll see how we go. It is going to follow a similar sort of pattern, so it'll come out around along the base and then up and connect to that tube. This time around I might start at the radiator end. All I'm doing here is just giving myself a bit of a guide as to where halfway is for the silicone joiner, so I can make sure that I've got an even amount of the radiator and then the flexible hose sitting in there. I'm a bit pedantic about how things look. So I'm just trying to work out what's going to look best for these clamps. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'll have to go and find the brackets for these hoses. I think there's one here and then one for each end, but I might even just look at where it's going to work best. I think maybe that corner will work best, but maybe that side. Be nice to have it all symmetrical. That's just me being pedantic, but we'll see how it works out. And that just about sums up today's episode, assembling the radiator and thermo fans and installing them along with the chassis extension panels. So if I take a step back here, you can see that that front extension panel and radiator assembly really does add to the front length of the front end of the car. It kind of looks a bit awkward, to be honest, standing here. The front almost looks too long for the vehicle, but that will all, I suppose, resolve itself as I move into the next episode where I start to install the front suspension. So that's all for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you like these episodes and the level of detail that I'm going into with the assembly of this GT40 kit car, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss future updates.